everyone. This is update for December 19, 2022, day 299 of the war and of the date update. So just want to, for those who are just waiting for military update, what's going on the battlefield, there's no news, so nothing really new. So, if you don't want to listen to the rest of it, then so I kind of help you out, let's put it this way. So I'm going to actually talk a little bit. It's going to be short, first of all. So that's a video because really not that much is happening right now. So the most important is in terms of the strategic news is that Russian currency ruble fell to 68 rubles per $1. If you remember, like literally probably like last week I was reporting there was like 64 something like that, and the slide accelerates essentially, and all of it is related obviously to deteriorating situation in the Russian economy as a whole. And I mentioned this before that the Russian state finances in a terrible shape. They used to be in pristine shape up to about sometime in July of this year. Then it slowly started deteriorating, and it gets to the point where deterioration is going to be more and more visible and creating more and more problem. Basically, it's a sort of exponential function at this point. And what is happening is Russian government cannot collect revenues from the economy, from all sort of not only, let's say, from natural gas export or other exports, but generally the internal consumer also not working, right? So everything is internal. The most important is really actually internally Russian economy is not working. And that's where the sort of root cause of everything, right? Because if it worked internally, you lost export, some import. You don't have enough import. I mean, import is not really a problem for Russia still. You can survive, but if your internal economy is not really working, you're kind of done. Just a question of time. So in the war of attrition, I always say there's a lot of things that are favoring Russia. There's one thing that clearly not favoring Russia, and specifically the economic situation. And this has been Achilles heel for Russia, for Soviet Union. That's how the Soviet Union fell apart. It's all sort of this needle is in the economy, and it's always neglected, has been neglected by the communist regime, which is obviously doesn't understand economy in the first place, never understood that, and that's why they failed. And this new Russian regime is basically ancestors of the sort of KGB and communist regime, and so they just continue the same line with some modification. I have to say, they got a little bit better. It's not as bad as how it used to be during the Soviet time. But anyways, so Russian central bank is essentially issuing unbacked credit to banks, and banks essentially buying those. It's done through repo market. I don't want to go deep into this financial wiring, how this financial system works, but essentially, central bank is financing Russian government, Russian state budget deficit, basically shortfall in revenue that Russian government still wants to have, and they doesn't have from the economy. What they do, they basically borrow money from the central bank, but they use basically doesn't go directly from central banks, so it kind of like more sort of invisible to average person. But the way it works, it goes from central bank then to regular commercial banks, and then those regular commercial banks go and buy government debt essentially. So that's just there's a sort of transmission mechanism that little bit not like just one step, it's just two steps basically. But anyway, so the point is that Russian central bank is now financing using unbacked credit. And the point of unbacked here is there is no goods to cover all of that currency that's being issued. And so as a result, you have inflation and falling Russian ruble relative to US dollar. So that's really what's happening in a nutshell. And this situation is going to get worse. And eventually, this is the most, say, damaging, the most dangerous thing to the Russian, state, to Russia's ability to continue the war. And if anything, this may eventually lead to that 1917 moment in Russia. We're still far away from it, but uh, this is maybe it's, we can say, beginning of the end, but it will still be going to be far away. Then the next important news is that European Union is introducing a price cap for natural gas starting February 15. It's going to be 1900 US dollar per 1000 of cubic meters of natural gas, or this is equivalent to 180 euros per megawatt hour of basically energy that's being produced. So as you can see, this is really again similar to the crude oil price cap, essentially meaningless just gesture, or also kind of like a propaganda gesture, because Russia used to sell its natural gas before the war for different, consumers, different buyers, but between 400 to 500 US dollars per thousand cubic meters of natural gas. So as you and it was to roughly 200 billion cubic meters of natural gas per year, right? So this price 1900 is, let's say, just we're gonna do approximations. So like let's say four times, or you can say 4 or 5 times higher than what they used to get, right? So you don't really need to export 200. You divide it by four, you're getting 50,000. If you divide by, 50 billion cubic meters. If you divide it by, let's say, five, you even get to like 40 billion. Not sure if Russia right now is exporting that much. I think it's really went down to like 20 or 30 at this moment, billion cubic meters. But you as you can see, it's still sort of not end of the world for Russia. Similar with the crude oil. Then sort of kind of like little follow up on yesterday's discussion of Africa and how there is basically neo-colonial wars happening there, and what Russia did, the Wagner mercenaries did. So there is a EU mission there, and they burned it. So all of that EU mission was burned in Central African Republic by Wagner mercenaries, not literally by them, but they trained locals, and those went and basically burned it. Basically, then let's talk a little bit about sort of again about Russia. So the Crimean Bridge, which is connects Crimean Peninsula and sort of Russia, which is down here. So Russian authorities report that it resumed its operation specifically for the outer part, right? So the railroad is still sort of being fixed, but the outer part has been fixed and now operational. At least, let's say that's at the face value we take that report, and probably not far away from the truth. So this again takes away even, as I said before, any sort of opportunity and possibility for Ukrainian potential offensive that was sort of discussed but never materialized. So now it's a sort of last nail in the coffin of that offensive at this point, the resumption of the operation of the Crimean Bridge. There is also interesting news related to China and Russia. Huawei, which is a large producer of communication equipment, which is, as I said, mentioned many times before, many countries in this world relying for 4G and 5G communication equipment on Huawei. And so it actually closed its office in Russia and basically laying off 2,000 employees or offering them to transfer outside of Russia. So while on the surface it looks like okay, sort of kind of like a negative for Russia, what this really means in reality is that this is just a shrewd move by Huawei and Chinese authorities because they don't want to have the criticism from the West saying like, okay, well, you supplying equipment, you actively operating in Russia, and so on. So they need some ammunition to deflect the blame that's coming from the West. So what's going to happen is basically, let's say Huawei is going to move its office to, let's say, Belarus or Kazakhstan, and they're going to supply to Russia everything, whatever they need. Just it's going to be happening out of the neighboring country, and it's not going to be happening, out of Russia. So then, Huawei can if they go to World Trade Organization to settle dispute, they're going to say, well, we're not in Russia, it's all false claims and so on. So on the surface, looks like there is kind of like a negative for Russia, but in reality, it's actually how to say, I would say correct move given the circumstances for both Russia and China. Then the most important part is that the next sort of important news is that Russian president came to visit Belarus, and Belarus president he also came with Minister of Defense and Minister of Foreign Affairs. So as you can imagine, that's really a heavy team. So again, the misconception, especially on the Ukrainian side, which is really primitive interpretation of the news. Okay, they coming to force Belarus to participate in offensive, new offensive on Kiev, which is again speaks a lot about inability to think. The real reason they came there is first of all to cement um, essentially that Belarus is together with Russia in all its ways, and basically Belarus is becoming kind of like a bridgehead, Russia's bridgehead or salient towards West. And they need to sort of fortify it as much as possible because they're expecting sort of like large offensive from the West. And so what they really need to do, they delivering advanced weapons to Belarus, like S-400 that was deployed recently in Belarus, and so basically Belarus will become a. But the idea is from a Russian perspective, let's make Belarus another battlefield if there is attack from the West. So the fighting is going to be happening in Belarus, and we're going to keep fighting as far as possible from let's say Moscow or from more deeper inland Urals of Russia essentially. So that's the whole point of all of this, and they also Russian military is going to be training Belarus pilots to carry essentially nuclear warheads on airplanes, meaning tactical ones, right? So this is more about full integration of Belarus uh, army into the Russian army, essentially. That's the whole, essentially, the point of all of this. There's essentially command of the Belarus army is going to be done out of, Russian army headquarters, right? So they basically it's going to be extension of the Russian army, just called Belarus army. That's the whole point of that whole visit, and what uh, Russian Putin was trying to achieve there, which he success. I mean, it was very clear. There was no expectation that this is going to fall apart at this point, because the Belarus president has no other option, let's say viable option. So, oh, and then I want to mention about this disgraceful law that has been passed by Ukrainian parliament about essentially putting in jail Ukrainian soldiers for refusing to sort of fulfill suicidal and criminal orders by the middle level commanders who are, for the most part, incompetent. And I would say should be sort of put in a panel squad and sent to basically, frontal storm of the Russian Wagner mercenaries. That's the best they can be used for. But unfortunately, these people are actually trying to do the opposite with the sort of regular soldiers, and so, but so now it's really very clear. I sort of knew it, but there was no evidence for this. That this whole law is coming from the head of Ukrainian military, which is Zaluzhny. So he head of not the Minister of Defense, because that person is complete puppet and doesn't even know what he's doing there. But from head of the Ukrainian sort of army headquarters, Zaluzhny, who essentially is who is in charge of the army. So this really, what this really means is, that he admits that he's personally incompetent to actually change the situation in the army, and what he resorting to is basically, forcing people or threatening people to do things, and that really never worked, and never will work. And so that really means that he sets up Ukraine for the failure. He's gonna fail personally as a result of this, but he also will sort of take Ukraine with him by trying to do this and enacting this law essentially. Because the whole point of the what the problem was, that instead of solving the problem, he's basically magnifying and making problem worse, and it will sort of blow up spectacularly, just a question of time. And at that point it will be like, oh, why did it happen? Well, it happened because of all, instead of solving the problem, he allowed, or he actually made problem worse and deeper and large in in all aspects of it. So this is again confirms that Ukrainian military top is, as I said before, is the just Soviets general that are completely incompetent, not in the right place, and they will not be able to lead Ukraine to successful war for for sort of its own survival, because they're simply not capable of doing that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of internally in Ukraine. There's a lot of people who think that Zaluzhny is some kind of military genius, which is he's not. All of the so-called successes is really not a result of Ukrainian actions or Ukrainian military command actions, but really result of two things: is failures of the miscalculations of the Russian military command, and sacrifice of the ordinary regular Ukrainian soldier. And I wouldn't even call them soldiers, because they're not sort of soldiers. That's not sort of Ukrainian tradition to have a soldiers. It's a warrior. That's the proper name for the people who they're on the ground. And those people as warrior, that really means it's not a, because soldiers unfortunately kind of has this implication of the slave. For the, I know there will be a lot of sort of criticism towards me after all of this, but if you really go really to the bottom of it, it's a slave. The warrior is totally different. It's independent person who fights for his own or her own interest, and that's a huge world of a difference. And in Ukrainian culture, it's a culture of the warrior. It's not the culture of the soldier in the first place. And what he's trying to do, because warriors, they independent, they they don't want to sort of follow. They will not follow, suicidal attack, which means by default, if you have suicidal attack, there's a problem, right? That you made a mistake, something is wrong. So basically, you don't need heroes. If you have heroes, that's the first sign that military command is absolute failure. And so again, this will sort of put a clash between the sort of regular sort of warriors and this incompetent middle and top of the Ukrainian military, and may result in the coming months as into big problems. So again, this is just confirms of like incompetence. There is no some kind of like a savior coming, in the face of Zaluzhny, that somehow is different, better, or whatever. This is just another Soviet general. That's exactly Soviet general. There's nothing more about him, and just he just a part of this rotten and broken system, and he's no better than the system itself. And he was calling Russian generals, butchers like Zhukovs and so on. But he needs to look into the mirror, and he probably will see Zhukov there as well. No much difference there. So now let's actually move to Ukrainian power grid. So there was attack in the morning on Ukrainian power grid. It was not powerful attack. At the same time, it did a lot of damage, which again goes to sort of say that the whole power grid is really, in slowly dying, and you really don't need much additional, um, you know, kicks into it to completely put it in complete knockdown and basically into coma and basically end death. So as a result, the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, is essentially without power. Uh, when it's going to be even like some level of power is still going to be 2-3 days at best, and probably even more. So, and then at this point, the norm is to be without electricity for at least 10 hours and have electricity for 1 or 2 hours, and have no electricity for like another 10 hours plus. So again, situation is critical. It's probably we're observing how the power grid is collapsing and disintegrating into the islands essentially at this point. So this is going to be the first stage of complete disintegration in this level. Again, just want to the point, the whole idea is that the attack was not that strong, but the damage was extremely magnified, which means that the system is really living, on the band-aids, and it's essentially at the limit of its capacity. So that's all in terms of sort of general news. And now let's jump to the walk through the battlefield. As I said, there is nothing terribly new there. We're gonna do it in a clockwise fashion, starting from the north. So the situation along the state border is somewhat more intense. There is more intense Ukrainian shelling or Ukrainian attacks on the sort of neighboring Belgorod region and Kursk region, which is just let's say primitive attempts to sort of at revenge and propaganda tools, which, as I said many times, are essentially useless. Nevertheless, Ukrainian top tries to do that for no, as I said before, you have now probably good understanding of the quality of that top. Now let's move to North Luhansk front line. Things here are more or less the same. Some Russian attacks in all the same places, without so far any success here. So the status quo here for now remains. Now let's jump to North Donbass front line. Things here are also similar, sort of Russian attacks, Wagner mercenaries attacks. No sort of advances today, but that's, as I said many times before, that's That's how it works. So now let's move to central Donbass front line. Things here also, uh, well, actually, somewhat different in some ways, because looks like a Russian command, as I said before, for whatever reason they abandoned this northern sector around Avdiivka, and they really focused on really just Marinka. That's really the only place where they trying to achieve something. There is a like strong feeling that whoever is sort of in charge of this group, Russian troops here around Donetsk, that that person needs to show some kind of progress to, let's say, Minister of Defense or Russian president, that there is something is sort of they're doing something, they're moving forward, and probably because he does not have enough or does not have enough skills to really achieve anything. So he's pulling everything into one single narrow point, which is Marinka, and tries to kind of like a needle to sort of pinch through whatever through piece of paper or whatever you call it, uh, and to show something. Okay, we captured Marinka. So far, Russian troops were not successful in capturing Marinka. They did make some progress there, but it's not like okay, yeah, we really achieved breakthrough or something. Just another quarter in this small town was captured. Doesn't really, strategically doesn't change anything. But does have there's very strong feeling that this is just kind of like a for the show for the upper levels of the Russian command, which again, as I said, there's that's again the same Soviet system that's in Ukraine, the same Soviet system works in Russia, except in many ways it's much worse because there is more resources to be wasted to support uh, this system essentially. Now let's move to the last section of the front line, Zaporizhya. This place is sleepy as always. And there was an email from one of the viewers um, where I guess there is some confusion about the China and Taiwan and sort of like at least my position. I just want to clarify it. So China essentially won Taiwan at this point without shooting anything. The only thing they need to wait 2 years. Things can change in 2 years, but if things don't change the same day where they are, they will win. They will sort of gain control over Taiwan through political means, because the party that supports Taiwan becoming part of China is going to win politically. The president is going to be from that party. I forgot. I think it's Nationalist Party or something. Gamindan. I think that's the name of it. So they essentially, you know, that's how. So this is ideal victory, right? This is what Sun Tzu is teaching and preaching, was preaching, uh, and so that's like a almost perfect military victory. So that's on one hand, right? On the other hand, you have deteriorating, global economy and Chinese economy that's extremely quickly deteriorating internally, not terribly visible to sort of outsiders, especially to the West, because there's still huge cultural barrier there between China and the rest of the world, and so that by itself may push for military confrontation. And even if it's not necessary, Taiwan is essentially is in the pocket of China at this point. Just need to wait patiently 2 years. They may still do it just because they need this release valve for this negative energy that's accumulated in China because of the falling economy that's falling apart. And Chinese president does not have solution. He's not the kind of person that can come up with any kind of solution. So that's the only way. That's a risk to the invasion of Taiwan. That Chinese economy really deteriorates. There is let's say, social unrest, political unrest there, and then Chinese government will decide to sort of channel that outside, because something similar has been going on in Iran. For those who not familiar with what's going on in Iran, there is obviously, as you can imagine, social unrest and political unrest. So what Iran is doing, they basically have essentially expeditionary armed forces that are operating in Syria, in Iraq. So essentially, they're trying to get like kind of Iranian sort of government is sort of trying to release all of this negative energy on other neighboring countries. That's really what's essentially happening there. In that's a typical path of the authoritarian governments, and Chinese is for, without any doubt is authoritarian government. So that might be that's the only reason that China may invade Taiwan. And then related to this, as you can see, they in China they're relaxing this COVID restrictions because it starts to generate actually this social unrest in China. So not because they basically the screws got tight too tight essentially that the vessel can blow up basically and throw those screws out, and so they just like loosening up a little bit screws so that there is a release valve for all of the pressure that's built up in the vessel. By vessel I mean China. So that's really what's happening in China in general, and the situation with Taiwan. So still huge unknown what's going to happen there. But as I said, if it's going to happen, it's not going to happen that sooner than April of 2023, and probably even might be later. But the earliest is April of 2023 that this can start. Okay, that's it for the day. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow, bye bye.